Hello there, Comic Clan, and welcome to Comics in the Cross, the greatest YouTubers you have never heard of. I, of course, am your host for today, Cross, along with my co-host today, Nitro, and we are joined by not one but two very special guests. You're getting double the blessing today, double the trouble here, as we have Amit Tishler and Elliot Sperl, the co-creators and co-writers of The Last Wardens, joining us for today. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us for today's interview. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome.
It's a pleasure to have you both here. Absolutely adore the book, absolutely adore The Last Wardens. For you all watching, you can see it on the screen right now. The cover of issue 1, and yeah, we are excited to talk to you about this and kind of get into a little bit of just introducing our audience to who you guys are, because this is your first time on the show. So yeah, so thank you for joining us though.
For having us.
Yeah, it's been an absolute blast having you guys on. Sorry, I'm trying to get my head in the right frame because we have not been talking for like 15 minutes before I hit record on stuff. So I'm trying to.
They said all the good stuff before.
I'm gonna say we talked about so much stuff. Look, we need to stop and hit record to get into this today. But
let us know who you want starting.
So yeah, I think best thing to do is kick off is just to introduce yourselves. We want to hear a little bit about who you guys are, about a little bit about your background. You guys were, as we started doing research on you, you guys were in animation for quite a wide variety of companies, and how you guys went from doing that to then getting into comics and where you kind of started in comics. So Amit, we'll start with you. You're right above me on my screen, so let's kick it off with you first if you want.
All right, sure. I'll tell my own story, and Elliot can kind of lead you through his both perspective and journey, because we're not conjoined twins. We've had our own journey.
What?
I know, shocking. He's actually like his view is inverted. He's right underneath me. I have no legs.
I just imagine the room split.
I literally just getting that scene from that one of Rick and Morty from Interdimensional Cable, where they've got the two guys like doing the different shows, but they're actually conjoined in the middle, and it's like that's what we're saying. They're actually right next to each other. We just can't tell from here.
Exactly, bizarro world. And anyway, so as for me, I started as a 2D animator years ago, and I'm gonna kind of compress years of career into as small of a story as I can. But I started as a 2D animator production artist, jumped a lot between like video games and television early on in my career. So that was, you touch the software side of things, then you touch the traditional entertainment side of things, eventually leaned harder into the software side of things, ended up going back into games, from there to technology, ran a startup with a few founders for like 4.5 years that dominated my life. And at that point, I was more in a creative director capacity, like the CCO of the company. So software product designer, again, all around media and entertainment. Always I've never actually ventured out of the entertainment industry in any way. It's just that the way I approached it career-wise was always different.
Mm-hmm.
After the company was acquired, essentially me and my entire team essentially continued the exact same kind of work in the company that bought us. And then I was a creative director on a lot of new media projects, right? So that was like location-based experiences and activations, licensed games, and so on and so forth. Throughout this entire career journey, from like production to more leadership positions in or above production, writing was a big investment. Like you have your jobby job, the thing that pays for the house, pays for the bills, and then you have your passion work, which is, for me, it was writing. It was writing shows, optioning, pitching to TV networks, learning a lot about how those pipelines work. And I ended up doing that across all mediums because, and this is true for both me and Elliot, we're big media consumers and across all verticals, essentially, like comics consumers, TV consumers, video game players. Like we just like it wherever it is. And that also shapes our view of media in general and our approach to it. And for me, like I started from comics because as a 2D artist, that's kind of where most 2D artists I know started from, because it's more approachable. So when you're the weird kid in class that always just draws stuff in the corner and everybody's like, oh, look at that, that's great. So when you're that kid, you can't start well, nowadays you can start producing films. Back in the 80s, early 90s, you couldn't really just produce home films as easily, especially not as a kid. So the medium that's the closest to something doable is comics. So you start telling your stories through essentially like self-made comic books. So I think a lot of people from our generation, like older millennials, that's how we started. And eventually when I went to school for animation because my passion for film kind of came in. And again, it kind of reshapes everything in terms of where my career took me, but this was always a part of it. So for me, going into comics is more of a formality as opposed to it's kind of returning to form because it's never not been part of it. Like if you're in animation, you end up kind of touching a little bit of everything: character design, background, storyboards. Like you essentially have a lot of adjacent skills. So the transition back into comic really came down to when me and Elliot started working together, and he can talk more about how we met, but we ended up working together in a local studio, and I was already like in the groove of developing my own IPs, pitching them, selling them around, and again, to different mediums, and we started developing stuff together. That's a short version of it. And eventually, when we were going like, hey, where else or how else can we tell stories? And now that you know stuff that I haven't announced here yet, like about how we're dealing with stuff across different mediums, you know what I'm talking about. But comics was just one of those choices, right? We're like, hey, this would be a great thing to say, to tell this story as a comic book. Let's see if that's a viable option, if there's interest in it. And we found a lot of luck in there. And I think part of it was who we were, part of it was timing, part of it was the type of stories that we wanted to tell or the types of perspectives and the advantages that we bring along as people who have these additional skills that we're very heavily leveraging right now. But that's kind of what led us back into comics, which has now become a big focus for us because we've been in it for years, like since 2021, I think, right? Like actively, like when we got our first deal. All the stuff that we have coming out now is to everybody looking out from the outside, it feels like, oh, these guys kind of came out of nowhere. And we're like, oh, we've had like multiple books in production that are only starting to come out now. You're only seeing all of this, but there's a lot more that's still kind of, like sliding out there. So we're only now experiencing essentially the release of a lot of these projects. But we've been kind of consumed by this for a while navigating whatever other projects we're working on.
That's awesome. That's insane. It's kind of been like involved and encompassed in all of this different stuff and all of these different mediums and just getting immersed in all of that. That's really amazing. It's kind of brought you back around to comics in that way. That's really quite phenomenal. Well, Elliot, what about yourself? Where did your journey begin? Obviously, the two of you kind of converged on each other, but as Amit said, you started off in different places. So how did you kind of get into that?
Yeah, he was raised in Israel. I came skipping out of the Midwest. Definitely different places.
Slightly different, yeah. Slightly different.
Slightly different. Yeah, but I was also the weird kid in the corner, always drawing and, working on my own comics growing up. I actually went to college originally to try and pursue comics. It was actually, I think, right before enrolling that completely on a lark that I was, the comic program at the time was completely filled up. And I was like, well, shit, what do I do? And then he said, well, have you tried, animation? And I thought about it, and I think something instantly clicked with that. So I went to school at SVA, 4 years. Graduated right during the 2008 crash, which was fun. But managed to, perfect timing. But I, survived and managed to, work on freelance projects for pharmaceuticals, and finally got my first animation test that brought me out to California. It was on a show called DJ and the Bro by Titmouse for MTV back in the day. And then just kind of worked one gig to the next. And finally, and also partially thanks to Amit here, managed to get my reel in front of the people on Bob's Burgers. And I've been working for them ever since. But rewinding for a hot second, the way I met this guy was way back at Stupid Buddy. I was in, I think, the basement, basically, like with the rest of the animators. And
No, that was Starburst.
No, you're right. I'm sorry. I studios with F's names. Yeah, Starbirds. I was in the basement, and he was upstairs, and I think one of my coworkers was like, "Hey, let's go meet the upstairs people," and I was like, "I'm too much of an introvert. Are you sure?" And he's like, "No, let's do it. Let's do it." And sure enough, I got up there and met this guy who looks exactly like a Viking. I'm like, "Hi," and he's like, "I'm Amit," and I'm like, "Excuse me, I you know, what are the?" And he's like, "Meat." I was like, "Oh, okay, got it. Not a meat, not a vegetable. Got it." So met him, and apparently made a good enough impression that he recommended me to hop on to Stupid Buddy, which was another fun show that we worked on Camp WWE for them.
Nice.
And that gig was hilarious because we just got to hang out together in this weird little cabin in this giant garage, essentially. And while we were in this like weird space, we were like, hey, we just found out we had a lot in common and decided to work on projects together. We actually started kind of developing our first IP there. And it just kind of spiraled off from there. Been working together ever since.
And that's how Elliot got me into Dark Souls.
Oh God, yeah. Circling back, yeah, video games, man. Yeah, we are big FromSoft fans.
Nice.
That is awesome. Okay, that's a heck of a thing to talk him into. It's like, yeah, let's get you into Dark Souls, and I'm like, boy, you start him on a journey with that.
That's fine, but he was tenacious.
It was worth it.
That is awesome. So yeah, so you guys have been basically working together for quite some time and all this stuff. So
Been really close to a decade, I think, in a couple years, a year and a half. Yeah.
So I think if I'm correct in this, and if I'm not, please correct me, but Last Wardens is the first major comic project that you guys have worked on together. At least it's came out. Like, I meet you.
That is being released.
Yeah, at least it's came out and we've gotten to see. Because I mean, you obviously had released Eden Frost first with Mad Cave on your own. Obviously, like you said, the timelines for like what comics you've worked on and what's actually seen the light of the day has been kind of all over the place. Was that like the first venture for you? Was like you did Eden Frost and kind of then you started working together, or was that just a venture you took off on your own, but everything else has kind of been? Because everything that you guys have got coming up and that you've done seems to be very much side by side working together. It's definitely a tandem working together in pretty much everything.
Yeah. It's weird. So, you know, like before we started working together, I worked on a whole bunch of different things, right? Like, and some of them were solo, some of them with other creators. That it really is on a project to project basis. Eden Frost, I think, from all of the stuff that we collectively have done, it was like the third, like Eden Frost and the Last Wardens. I think we ended up getting the contracts for them at the same time from Mad Cave Studios. But we pitched them Wardens first. So in terms of the progression out of the, let's say, without being able to announce certain things, let's say 4 first projects that I'm going to address right now. Eden Frost was the last one that was pitched. Last Wardens was the second to last one. So it's weird that both of these ended up coming out first.
Yeah.
But it came from essentially production-related reasons that's tied to the publisher and less to us. We're still at work essentially on the first titles that we ended up selling together. Now, when I say selling together, that's a differentiation from stuff that we've worked on together. Because one of the things that, you know, we develop a lot of different things. Not all of them will end up getting published, or some of them will end up, you know, like, hey, we finished developing it, we couldn't find traction right now, then 10 years down the line, that's when all of a sudden you find somebody who's willing to take this on. Last Wardens is actually one of those properties. We're big believers in iteration, right? So if you try to pitch something and it doesn't work, You put it to the side, but you could also revisit it, rework it, try to figure out what about it was missing, or like you keep on iterating until it hits if there is something there. Sometimes there isn't, and we just go like, you know what, this will just end up on a shelf and maybe we'll never get to do anything with it. But for the most part, a lot of our properties were things that we ended up iterating on and then pitching again and finding the right buyer or the right investor or the right target. Sometimes it's timing, sometimes you never know, right? So Last Wardens is something that we started working on in like 2018.
Wow.
We've pitched it multiple times and in multiple mediums as well. But and it had different names. Last Wardens was the last name, and you never know what's the thing that really tips it over because it's never just one thing. But Last Wardens, as you know, it was the last iteration of that property, of that story. And if you go all the way back to its origins, you see where it came from or where it started, and then you see where it ended. And that's its own very interesting journey because you can kind of understand a lot of the decisions in retrospect. Oh, so at first you tried this angle, but then when you added this, it feels like a completely different thing. Like there's a lot that goes into that. So Eden Frost was one of those things that I developed more as a reaction to. I was inspired by things that were just happening around me.
Mhm.
Primarily at the time, it was like very disturbing rise of anti-Semitism pretty much everywhere. And I had a lot of thoughts about identity politics through the lens of anti-Semitism, right? And that's something that I was just inspired to kind of do in it because it's so tied to my origins, my family story, and my view of things. It was a solo project. It's something that I just kind of had to do on my own. And even to this day, there's stuff that we are working on together and stuff that we're working on individually. And you kind of end up doing both. And in the end, what sees the light of day is what sticks with buyers, whether they're publishers of games, audio dramas, TV shows, or comics. It's wherever it starts, and then it can expand to wherever else it goes. I don't think either of us. I heard this a few times, and I never truly understand where it comes from. The idea of like something was made only for a single medium. I think any good story can exist in any medium if it's adapted to take advantage of what that medium offers, not as an excuse. And I have a lot of respect for that because that's what inspired me to do pretty much everything in my career, right? Passion for video games came when you start playing video games as a kid. A lot of the video games you end up playing early on are kind of shitty license games because you like Spider-Man or X-Men, but it brings you into these mediums and it allows you to respect them in a very different way, and you kind of evolve from there. So hopefully that answers the question more or less.
Yeah,
Also,
absolutely.
comics themselves, like the way we got into comics, like was almost by luck at a certain point.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah. We were trying to pitch so many things back at the time, but
Yeah.
I was like, we just wanted to try a new medium, and it just ended up working out perfectly.
Yeah, and you adapt your but like if a story works, it can work in different mediums once again if you show respect to the medium and know how to control it and not as an excuse. And it's certainly something that has worked for us for multiple things. Like some things were just developed from the ground up with that in mind. But again, to us, everything, no matter where you start, it is just a starting point. A story can be told in a million different ways, and if you do it correctly, it builds it further. Like I'm a big fan of like the very process of adaptation. Like it's been kind of an obsession of mine for many years, and we're very invested in it as a team, like of how to adapt a property in a way that fleshes it out, that expands it, that gives fans of the property something that they didn't get from the other medium because you couldn't get that kind of detail from that other medium. So to think about it as something fresh and different, and to me, that is a huge creative outlet. And together, we're using that very well to our own advantage and using skills that we've developed over our own careers.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I have a question. So I guess I obsess about the creative just process in general of comics. I find it very interesting, both from a visual standpoint and just like ideation standpoint. So I have a two-part question for you guys. One, how did the idea of the Last Wardens come about?
Mm.
And two, how how does the process of co-writing a comic book work? Like what does that process look like from start to finish? Like what does the
Yeah.
writer's room, so to speak, I guess, look like? Like how do you go about even doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in about the dev process for sure. So just starting with the last question first. Sorry.
No, no
um,
worries.
yeah, so we have a step-by-step process. It begins with, discussing discussions. Then we move on to production. Then we do a review cycle, then sales, and then iteration. Right. So kicking things off, we start just 5 o'clock calls every day after work, basically, for like Amit said, roughly a decade. Um, we discuss ideas that we have that we want to create. We basically, brainstorm, talk about the characters, the themes, the story arcs, everything else. And once we have kind of like a solid grasp, we move on to, production, where we basically, start designing the deck, our pitch deck. I start creating artwork, or we hire someone to do artwork for us. We do design guides. We work on our verbal pitch presentation for publishers and make sure that it's all locked down. And then, of course, once all that's done, we move on to reviewing, and where we kind of like really piece it apart, like pick it apart and kind of like dig in, try and see can we lose this? Can we tweak this? Just kind of just do a quality of life pass on everything, make sure everything's polished. And then once we have something totally locked down, that's ready to rock and roll, then we move on to sales. So I'll let Meet pick it up from sales.
Well, when you go to sales, that's when you're kind of forced to face reality in many ways, right? Because at that point, you're putting it in front of people who are there to judge whether they want to take on this project, whether they want to partner up with you or not. That's when you learn what works about it and what doesn't work about it to other people who are at that point essentially your audience.
Yeah.
And that feedback is important because it doesn't really matter how much you like your story or even how good it is. Like, if it doesn't stick, it doesn't stick. And at that point, we take that feedback. If it doesn't just immediately go, then we go, okay, how else can we, based on, things that we know about this publisher or based on the feedback, the specific feedback that we get, what can we massage or change in order to accommodate that? Like, what would flip that switch? And I think that is a really important process in terms of just having the humility to go, well, when we put it out there, people didn't get it in the same way that we did. So something must be missing. What can you do in order to make that happen? It forces you to look at everything a lot closer. So it's a good practice for, I think, anybody. I've noticed a lot of this weird there is this like common approach of like, no, this is my baby and it has to be this way. And I'm like, I really hope this isn't your baby, because you need to treat your baby much better than the things you can do with a story you have written. Because with a story you've written, if you are disciplined about it or if you're honest about it, you kind of have to sometimes tear it to shreds or, replace a limb. I hope you don't plan to do that with your baby. So stories should be malleable. You should be able to massage them. You should be able to tweak them, because in the end, you're not really, no matter how much we like, oh, we're just doing it for ourselves. No, we're not. If you're a storyteller, you want people to listen, right? Because you have a message, you have something to say, hopefully, right? If it's just for you, then fine. Make it in your own home and read it to yourself before you go to sleep. But the minute you're looking for ways to find an audience that this will resonate with, you have to listen to what the audience says and try to figure out what works and doesn't work. So
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, right. Like, so it really comes down to, the creative process sounds very mechanical, because in many ways it is. We've created this pipeline that forces us to go through very structured steps. Within those steps, you can have wild discussions and go anywhere and shoot the shit for hours, but it does forces you to narrow down on one problem at a time. And once again, it comes from a very like, hey, we're production professionals, so it comes from that thinking of like, first you got to do the foundation, then you have to do that. You have to build it up in a very disciplined way, and it does create a very healthy process. And that also kind of rolls back into your first question, which was where this started from or how this the basic foundation of this story, and this is a little weird looking at it right now, and I think we in different interviews we kind of got to talk about it a little bit, but take Danielle Pryor, like the main protagonist of The Last Wardens. She is what we found really, really nice and very validating and also just kind of heartwarming is people really like her. Like she read as a very strong protagonist. People relate to her. Like she doesn't feel like a cardboard cutout. Like she's dominant. I can tell you that the first versions of The Last Wardens, all the way up to like, I think she was like one of the additions that really tipped this over and allowed us to sell it to a publisher. She didn't exist in any of the early iterations.
Oh, wow.
When we started, this story was about a bunch of these monsters who belong to this ancient order and have this like mysterious mission and are kind of held hostage by this unknown entity that's sending them on these deadly missions, and it's a cat and mouse game between them as well. That was the original nugget, right? And it was in all of our early iterations of this story. The thing that really helped us tip this over, because no matter how we pitched it, people always liked it and they liked the world, but something didn't stick or something didn't make them go, I want to get into it. And adding Danielle as our POV character came from the thinking of like, well, what's a different way of telling that story that's more interesting than really focusing on the lore of this world and who this team is? Well, if the team's whole vibe, and you certainly see that right off the bat in the first issue, it feels very calm in the beginning, right? Like, well, you see this ominous warning that you're like, what was that about? And then we intentionally distract you and throw you into Danielle's life. And you go through it and you're like, oh, this is rough. And it's very relatable. She feels very real. You understand her relationship with her friends, the things that burden her. And then all of a sudden, just wrecking ball.
Yeah.
Like blowing in and everything spins out of control and you're kind of thrown up and you're confused and like, what is happening? Your life is getting thrown upside down. That was actually the twist to the pitch, because we went, so how does it feel to a normal person who's just trying to live their life, and all of a sudden a war mission just crashes into your life?
Yeah.
That's where Danielle came from as a character, right? And that completely shifted how this whole story is being told. Because now you're telling it from the perspective of someone who doesn't know anything about these people or people, right? Like, and doesn't know what's happening in the world around them. They're living in this like microcosm. And all of a sudden, this phenomenon just breaks into their life and completely destroys everything. And that's a very interesting angle. It feels different. And all of a sudden, it feels like it's Danielle's story. Danielle's journey through this, without major spoilers, is that she does end up essentially from a very it starts very oppositional between her and the Wardens. It's like, are we going to collaborate? Nope. It gets pretty tense between them, and eventually she shows some leadership skills and manages to kind of help weaponize them as a team, and ends up joining them on their adventures. But for our thinking of where to take this moving forward, is she is just at that point becomes part of the Wardens, while constantly looking for more answers and more context about why did this happen, not just to me, what's actually happening in this world. There's this whole reality I was not aware of. It gives you that audience proxy that allows you to discover things on the go. And that's where the story ended. But that nugget, the team and the lore behind them was always there in some way or another. The details might have shifted, but that's actually where the story started. And Danielle was just our vehicle to get into that world.
But going forward, our intention, if the series gets renewed, is to kind of take a look at the POV of the other Wardens as well. So it's not just Daniel's story, it's all of them. So we get to kind of see a day in the life of their experiences. With hopefully each arc.
Yeah, and that's really interesting though, just for you talking about the perspective of like, you know, you have this idea and you have this is what the pitch is, and then when you actually take it to the selling point and how you have to be ready to tear your story apart. And as a creator, that's a terrifying thing, because you're like, but this is my creation. What if it gets torn apart? What if it's not what I want it to be? And we all hear the horror stories of Hollywood ripping apart people's stuff and turning it into their own thing that's not what they imagined. But this is a great example of something that was 100% a positive in that light, because I've gotten to read the first 2 issues, and within at least those first 2 issues, the strongest point in them is Danielle. It's like she's the strongest point of it. And she's not a cardboard character. She's someone that you absolutely connect to. I mean, I think at this point, like it was only like in my rereading of issue 2, was I'm like, I started realizing, we're actually getting names for a couple of the Wardens now. They're not just like these creatures.
I noticed that too.
For the first half of the second issue, like we still don't know what they're called. I think there's one of them I still don't even know his name. And it's like, they're almost secondary, but it's like you've got that point of view character, but Danielle's a strong enough character where you're like, of course I'm following her, of course we're... And you spend that whole first issue just in her story and really getting to know her, and really her heartbreaking, and obviously not spoilers for it because it was in issue 1, but like her brother coming back and then turns into this Cronenberg-esque massive monster that merges with the house. And I'm like, you really see it from the human perspective of like, what the hell do you do when that's what happens to you? Like, how do you respond to that? And in issue 2, you really start to see her, like, how does she step up and deal with that situation? And it's like, it really helps draw you in. Whereas, like, don't get me wrong, the Wardens are really cool characters. Like, you really like, oh yeah, I want to see what these guys can do. These are really cool concepts. But Danny gives the heart.
By the way, she's the heart. And what you just said was so important. And once again, for us, hearing that is really validating. One of the philosophies behind how we write it, that experience you described of like, wait, I don't know this guy's name yet. You couldn't have made me happier, because one of the things we wanted to do is to essentially go every time that Danielle, like right now, you don't know a lot and you're constantly grasping for answers on why did this happen? What's going on? Who are these creatures? And that's the same questions Danny's asking constantly. Whenever she learns something, you learn something, because you're with her. And that's the thing that we're trying to maintain throughout this entire story, where once she started also picking up, like when you're picking up on a name, she picked up on a name. And you'll see it start coming in, where she's starting to adopt. She's like, okay, I have to humanize them. I have to talk to them. Because, again, by issue 2, they're still very, very oppositional. They're dismissing her like outright. It's going to be a lot more tense. Like, they're going to go head to head, because their mission is obviously to stop whatever is happening to Bruce, right? Her job is to save him. Those two things can't live in the same reality, right? So it's that kind of philosophy that led the whole storytelling of like, we're not going to give people answers. We're going to hope that they are trying to pick up on these small details on the go and realizing that they're learning little by little. And then every detail that you get feels precious. Right? Oh, I just learned this character's name. Oh, I just learned something about their leader. Wait a minute, it feels like you're getting something extra and you want more. And I can already tell you, we're going to drag you, like, wanting details, like, aggressively. Issue 6 is where you get a lot more context, but it's still the idea of drawing you more and more in with the same drive that Danny has, just wanting answers.
Really? I need to wait to issue 6? Really? Come on, man. Dang. We'll at issue 2. Come on.
It's going to be brutal. You're going to get little by little. I'm just going to say some bigger things you're going to be kept wondering. But that division of not focusing on the Warden's perspective of the story is extremely intentional. And it's to also create that tension between their team and what Danny goes through, because I think that one of the things that we did that made Dani like a very good protagonist or a very effective one is the fact that her most endearing quality is also her biggest flaw. That's something that you don't understand yet early on, but you'll start seeing as you move forward, which is, so one thing is very obvious early on. She is very stubborn, right? She goes headfirst into something like, no, I'm going to get answers and you're going to give me those answers, right? So she hounds people and she doesn't let go. And that is a core part of her character, even the fact that she's still in this town, even though she's been talking about leaving for years. And that, you get the idea that she's doubling down. That stubbornness is very, very endearing because it makes her very brave and it makes her very like proactive. It is also a problem, and it's something that she's going to have by the end of the story to deal with or grow out of or make decisions that force her to let go. And that journey is very, very intentional, and you can only make that effective if you really focus on her perspective, because you have to feel the way she feels before you realize that, okay, I'm feeling where this stubbornness is starting to be a little counterproductive. And I'm not sure, like, you're feeling like the person you're rooting for is starting to make mistakes, but you're still with them. Like, it forces you to have that self-introspection. So that's the whole point of keeping that division between her and the Wardens as time goes by, like throughout the story.
Yeah, I definitely like the point of view. Like, it's really hard, I think, especially for indie comics, to grab a reader within the first 2 pages. I feel like that's one of the most important things about comics. Because I've read comics where, I'm 10 pages in and I'm like, why am I here? Like, why am I reading this? Like, why do I care right now? But the ability that you guys have to just pull the reader in immediately with Dani's character, and even honestly in the first page, like, what is this? Like, what's going on? Like, what's who's singing? It was really, really cool. Yeah, I really, really dug it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was that was also a very intentional thing of like those first couple of very ominous, weird, cryptic pages. The whole goal is to keep it in the back of your mind. Wait, I'm going through this very like normal story about this girl from this town and everything that she's going through, and how. But there's something in the back of your mind telling you, wait, but there was that thing that they warned me about that's coming. What is that? And eventually it will be like a freight train. But that's literally those first 2 pages of not telling you what that is. That warning stays there because it means that whatever you're reading, even when you're kind of like phasing out of it, part of you knows something is coming, something is wrong, but you can't put your finger on it. And that creates that kind of tension that just stays with you. Those are just kind of scripting decisions, right? And it's something that we do as you read our future work, you'll see it in every single story. In different approaches to it, right? It's not always in the same way, but you'll always see that because I don't know, like we're not big fans of exposition, I guess. We like people. It's the kind of stories that we like. Like we like to figure things out on the go.
Yeah,
because it gets you as a reader more invested. And it forces you to pay attention to details and not gloss over. Like it draws you in because now you're like, well, I'm just part of this. Like I want this.
We've all seen those comics that it's like just a wall of text.
Exactly.
I'm like, I don't even want to read this page. Like, I don't want to do this.
Yeah. It feels like a burden, right?
Yes.
And it's interesting if you throw something at someone and they go like, all right, I want to know more. That's the reaction you want. Like Eden Frost starts with like literally the first panel is, hey, this entire village is burning. Right? We didn't see it. We're starting with kids on the run. That's a very simple way of doing the same thing, letting you know something terrible happened and forcing you to go, what just happened? That's a lot there's different philosophies to this, but I think it's a lot more interesting than just going like, here's everything very nice and this is their village life, but there's tension here and something bad is happening. That's a way of telling the story. I think it's a lot harder to grab you with that because once again, you're not setting that kind of like feeling of urgency or feeling of fear. Like you want to start with a certain emotion that leads you throughout the story.
Yeah.
And in Eden Frost, it is that urgency and that like, oh my God, something terrible happened. In Wardens, it's a warning. It's tension. It's this fear of like, something's happening, but I don't know what it is yet. Right.
Mhm.
So that's, again, all of these like just storytelling decisions that we hope will continue working the way they do.
Yeah. So talking about you had mentioned scripting, and both of you coming from an animation background and storyboarding, how how do you approach it like from a story standpoint? Comics is a sequential art form, right? So you're going from panel to panel. So in a way, I would assume it's kind of like animation as far as like how your brain thinks.
Yeah.
So how did you approach the like coming up with the script for the Last Wardens and just approaching that from a visual standpoint, knowing that you guys weren't actually doing like the kind of like the visual storytelling portion?
Great question. Like you said, there is a little bit of overlap in terms of thinking about it sequentially, like in animatic is the closest thing I can think of.
Hmm.
Um, it's funny because kind of going back, it was definitely a learning process. Like Amit mentioned earlier, our comics are kind of being released in reverse, essentially. So it's wild to kind of go back and see our learning process early on and how that was slowly refined um, up until the Last Wardens, which is the one that's most recent for me. So getting into the visuals of the scripters and how that all plays out on the page, especially with such a chaotic series like this, which is a lot happens on a lot of those panels. So
Yeah.
making sure everything fits and is coherent, and that there's still enough Easter eggs there in the background that people can pick up on and slowly learn from and be able to kind of put it in their back pocket for later was definitely a challenge. But I think he made it work, and specifically Rui made it work, who is just a fantastic artist. I think
The art is incredible, by the way.
it's
The
so
visual
good.
aesthetic on the Last Wardens is one of the things that immediately draws you in.
So I'm sorry, really quick little asterisk there. So I was the one who initially did the artwork for like the monsters and the wardens and everything else. But the funny thing is that coming from animation, my style is a little, and Amit knows this, kind of cartoony, right? So our first initial takes on these characters are big eyes, very like a little too exaggerated, very like animated series looking. And I'm so glad I tried, obviously there's a middle step, right? Tried making it a little bit more realistic.
Mhm.
But giving it to Rui, oh my God, he just elevated it so much. His work is really.
I was actually going to ask about that. It's like, because both of you come from animation standpoint, so I was going to say that it's like, what was the choice behind you not being the ones that did the art for this? But that makes a lot of sense now that your style just didn't fit it, and finding someone whose style fit it a lot better.
Because I mean, it's a pragmatic choice, right? Look, I mean, neither of us are comic artists, first of all, right? There are people, that's what they do for a living. Second, we both have full-time jobs that aren't this, right?
Yeah.
And we didn't want to be that close. One of the advantages of working with a publisher is that they would match you with people, and again, it's an interview process, right? They kind of like vet, you decide together. One of the most exciting things is the fact that you get somebody else to reinterpret what it is that you're doing, both in design and in storytelling. Taking it upon ourselves, sure, you could do it. I don't think it would spawn a better result, and certainly not as fast either, or as efficient. So both from a bandwidth and an end result, you want people who know what they're doing to take on this job, because they can just make it better, right? And that goes to character design, and that goes like, they're comic artists. Like you said, we came from animation. Yeah, do we have the technical skill? Can we? Sure. Are we going to do a better job than someone like Rui, who has been focused on doing this craft? No.
Yeah.
And what we want is a better product in the end of the day, something that people would love to look at and have the reaction you just had. And hey, having more people, like, we come from a very collaborative industry. You don't really do anything in animation as one person.
Yeah.
Do a little independent, but it's a big productions. It's a lot of people. So for us, working with multiple people doing multiple parts of the job, these are still super small teams compared to what we're used to, right? But still, it's something we're very comfortable with, and we were kind of looking forward to that because it allows us to also put our bandwidth into different things, right? If your focus is on story, you're getting an extra dimension, not just the stylization and the quality. You're getting an extra dimension to your work because somebody else is putting it through their filter. That's always exciting. It's why I think like both of us really enjoy the variant cover part because you get like how different artists just like do different takes on the same character that Elliot made the first design of, and then Rui redesigned, and then all of a sudden Skylar Patridge creates her own version, and like that's more fun. Like that is just a
that's
cool,
super exciting.
right? And so yeah, from no perspective, the fact that you can technically do something doesn't mean you should, because from a product perspective, you want to get the best product that you can.
Yeah.
Right. So every choice you make along the way needs to really focus on if somebody's going to pay to buy this thing, man, you give them the best experience that you can possibly give them. And every choice that you make needs to be justified by that.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's awesome. Sorry, I kind of derailed that there just for that kind of pop in. But yeah, it's really interesting to see that, and obviously, like, overall best choice was made there because Rui, as we've said already, did an amazing job with the artwork in this. It looks absolutely stunning. One thing I was kind of intrigued, speaking of like the monsters and the designs and stuff like that, and maybe this one specifically for you, Elliot, since you were kind of designs, what was your kind of influence behind the creation of this stuff? Because obviously this is a very horror-esque book, and obviously I kind of referenced it's very, the monster we see at the end of issue 1 is very Cronenberg-esque, this mountain of flesh that takes over the house, and it's this mishmash of everything that just absorbs everything around it. Like, what were the kind of influences behind that? What stirred that, and probably kind of stuff behind the whole of the creation of the Last Wardens in a sense, and this being obviously the first big monster they face? I'm assuming horror influences at least to some extent, or was there something else behind it?
So I'm going to split that in half because first off, favorite question so far. This is amazing. So the big villain, quote unquote, of the first arc, that started very different actually. That began a little bit more simple. It took the creation of Danny and her brother Bruce and the time period and integrating it into where he was coming from. That's how that villain was formed. It was very story first, essentially. I actually remember that conversation we had where that kicked off, and that's where it all came from. So that one is, yes, Cronenberg inspired, but really, and you'll see this a lot more in issue 6, like that, the way it functions really is tied back to Bruce more than anything else. Now, the other Wardens, that's a different thing. This is my favorite thing. So the monster designs, I obviously was inspired by a lot. It's kind of a grab bag of things, if I'm being honest. First and foremost, you might see some influence from like the Zoanoids from Bio Booster Armored Guyver, if you guys remember that series. Obviously the Kraken from the movie Deep Rising from like the early 2000s, right, with like worms, tentacles, and whatnot. Obviously, magical items and monsters from Dungeons and Dragons.
Nice.
Yes.
Obviously, references to Evil Dead, which I'm pretty sure you guys caught the reference there in issue 1. And Jaws, weirdly enough, like actually was a bit of an inspiration.
They're not there yet, though. They're not there yet, though, in Jaws. They'll get there.
I would say in general, there's the Jaws.
I guess so. All right.
Okay, now the fact that he's jumped in with that, I'm really intrigued where this Jaws reference is going to come up in the near future.
I need to know this.
References is what I was thinking of.
I'm sorry?
There's more direct references to Jaws specifically.
Sure. Yeah. And yeah, like
Just
obviously
teasing us
with
now, the pair of you. You really are. You're just...
But yeah, I would say a little bit of Scooby-Doo in there, sprinkled on top.
Nice.
Just a little bit. Yeah, just a touch, a smidgen.
Yeah, because you can definitely see the horror influence in the different things in the monster creation, and it looks like you had a lot of fun with the ideas and the designs and stuff for the Wardens, especially. You know, because there's only really 3 Wardens that we see in the flesh. There's one that we see as a 4th one, but they kind of change going into the 2nd issue, which opens a whole host of other questions that I'm sure will come up later. But like for what we've seen so far, we've not seen that many, but the designs are so intriguing and so interesting, and you can definitely see the pull of all these different ideas. It's really cool to see them.
And some of them evolve. Like if you think of like,
I was gonna say,
yeah.
Go ahead, go for it.
I was gonna say about Sierra and Lila specifically.
Yeah,
because like
so
the character
they changed a lot. Initially, Lila was a completely different character that had completely separate from Sierra in general.
Oh, really?
It was kind of yeah. I had obviously I think Lila is a much more stronger character, but it started out kind of more humorous than anything else. It was this big, it was still kind of the same essentially had the same powers, but the personality attached to it was much more Doctor Doom than anything else. Very grandiose and over the top. Which would have been funny, and it worked. But I think where we ended up going with it fits the character a lot better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he was like this ancient, very resentful ancient god that was essentially strapped or attached, bound to Sierra, who also had a different name at the time. But he was a lot more chatty, and Sierra became a much more interesting character. And that's the thing, like, if you're talking about like 4 characters, I would argue 5, because we're keeping it very vague. But Sierra is her own. Sierra and Lila are kind of their own individuals. But I'm actually glad that you didn't say that, because part of their arc that we're really hoping that the 2nd arc we get to actually focus on those 2, because they have a very interesting like backstory and what we want to do with them. But they're taking a backseat in this specific arc. But Sierra and Lila are like, Lila is essentially let's call it a shadow clone of Sierra, but they are individuals that are very much oppositional to each other in a lot of ways, and that you do see through the story. Like they kind of don't get along. There's a push and pull, but they are individuals essentially. That's part of the problem of their character. That's all I can say.
You do get to see a bit of that though, because you do, like, especially in issue 2, when obviously we see a bit more of the Wardens from issue 1. It's like, but you see Sierra and Lila like arguing with each other, and you only see half of the conversation because we don't know what Lila's saying. But it's clear that the 2 of them are having problems with each other, and like Sierra's a very angry, aggressive character, very angry and pissed off at everyone, essentially. Like every interaction is like that, but like her and Lila standing in the midst of this, you can definitely see the 2 personalities.
You see that at the end of episode or issue 1 too, where I think Spirit just out of nowhere just tells her to go F herself or something like that. Yeah.
And by the way, that's exactly what we want people to take out of this, as far as the Wardens are concerned, to get an impression of who they are, more than understanding how they became what they became, because we're not going to answer that yet. I mean, we're going to kind of give people a general contextual information of what happened to them, or how they ended up being something freaky. But as far as their own individual stories, that's what we want to dedicate each arc to kind of go through, hey, next story, Sierra and Lila are the focus and perspective characters, and you learn more about them, their struggle. And a lot of what you said is what we hope people really remember. Those details of like, well, she seems like she's pissed off at everyone. She's resentful. Once you end the two don't get along, and other things we don't understand Lila, which is a big thing about her character. Cannot communicate with anybody else except for Sierra. So what does that mean, or what does that do to someone? And all of these questions are questions you're going to start asking when you're focusing all of a sudden on that character. And those are really interesting questions. And once you get context, the goal is like, if you read a whole arc that is primarily focused on them in a current struggle, but also tells you where they came from, it makes you go, oh, it explains and validates everything that I felt or thought about earlier. Now I really get it. And you want to go back because you all of a sudden go, I understand all of this now. This is why she's always resentful. This is why they don't get along. This is like that. Those are all seeds that we're planting in there that, you know, on their own, they're fun. So you get an idea of who the character is, but they're very intentional. Like they're very intentional because we have written essentially the story of each character, so we know where they came from and where they want to go and where we want them to go. So that's a lot of the. I'm just glad that whenever we are like, "Ooh, they picked up on these small details."
Yeah.
No, absolutely, and I think that's it. It's like there's definitely the intrigue there of wanting to see like more about these characters and wanting to know, well, who are the Wardens? Why have they came together? Why are they doing what they do? And you know, typically you see in some, you know, other creations and stuff, the fact of, well, they're monsters that are fighting monsters. Like, well, how do we get those monsters on our side? You know, the comic kind of that comes to my mind is something like Hellboy, for example. You know, where you've got like the BPRD, he gets these bunch of monsters that are really not that different from the stuff that they're hunting, but they're working with them to hunt these other creatures. And, you know, it does a really good job of putting those questions out, but you also have the almost like the human element as well of, I want to know more about them. It's like, it's seeing what they can do is very cool, but like, I want to know who they are, how they got to where they are, what their struggles are, you know, using Sierra and Layla as the, you know, kind of like the main point there of how did they become joined? Because apart from having this shadow person attached to her, like Sierra seems like a normal person, really. There's nothing really about her that's any different, but like, how did she get this attached to her? Has it always been there? Why is she so angry? Why are they so connected? Why are they, you know, like, and then like you get some of the others, like Brick, for example, massive rock golem. I'm like, has he just always been a big pile of bricks, or was he a human, or did this happen to him, or did he somehow just get conscripted? Like, you want to know the story, even if it's a simple answer. You're like, you want to know how we got to where we are. The characters are all intriguing enough for that. Yeah,
I'm glad. And by the way, to a lot of the baseline questions, you'll get some idea, and it's going to be gradual. Like issue 3 already throws some things your way that gives you context, but all I can say here that isn't a really major spoiler is that what's happening to Bruce and what happened to the Wardens, or how they ended up being what they are now, same source.
Oh, okay. That makes sense, though. That makes sense.
There's a connective tissue to all the characters in the journey and what's happening in the world as a whole. And the deeper Danny has to go into it, because at some point she just has to go, unless I talk to these people openly, like this is just going,
Yeah.
That's when she starts finding out answers, because she starts demanding them and the cracks start showing. But again, it has to happen very organically, which is why we're drawing it out, because it has to feel earned and it has to feel contextual. Like we never wanted a scene where, you know, they come and just tell her everything. So this is our story. We are the Wardens. We came from this. Because it's not how people talk. Right, and especially not if you have kind of operation to just like, we just came here, we're supposed to be like coming in, taking this thing out, and moving on to the next thing. Like, you are getting in our way, get out, I have no time for exposition. So a lot of it comes to like that.
Yeah, that's literally what I was going to say. Like, going into issue 1 and 2, like, it very much seems like that, more like, that she's just they see it as like, you're very much in the way, like we're not going to deal with you because we're kind of in the middle of something, but as soon as it comes up, it's like, please move. We're trying to do a job here. Just please get out the way.
Get out of the way.
Like you're it's like there's no interest to like you said, there's no interest to like give this big explanation of like, this is why we're doing this. This is who we are. This is what's happened to your brother. It's like, no, we don't care. We're here to kill a monster. Like
That's exactly right. And of course, when the monster is also her brother or tied to her brother, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But the really cool thing, though, that you see, especially in issue 2, is that Danny, like, from having this very normal life in issue 1, you really see her starting to hold her own right from the get-go. Like, even just the fact that like, she's very headstrong and going against the Wardens themselves, and the fact like she is told like right off the bat, like at the end of issue 1, they're tossed out the house, and they say to her, "Get out of here. Let us take care of this." And immediately she's like, "No, no, my brother's in there. I'm going to go in and try and find him and save him." And it's like, what are you doing? You're claiming a giant flesh monster that is half your brother, half a house. Why are you doing this? And it's like, no, I'm going in there. And it's like, nothing you can say is going to stop her. And she is that very headstrong character. And she's holding her own and she's not taking the crap from any of the Wardens. Like, Sierra's like, gets really pissed at her and is like, no. It's like, you don't get to talk to me. Like I literally thought at one point she's going to shoot her. She goes to find the shotgun at one point in issue 2. And it's like, I thought Sierra's about to get shot in the face here from her. It's like, so she's just not taking anything that she's getting thrown at her. I'm like,
yeah. And that's, again, that stubbornness, right? That is both very endearing, but has its issues or is going to cause issues as we go down the line. Because one of the things with Danny that is also very clear is like you said, she's going up against something she really doesn't have a chance against.
yeah,
right?
absolutely.
She's not Rambo, and that's also very clear. She's extremely vulnerable. There's also a reason. I'm not going to say too much. Keep reading it, and a lot of stuff will make sense also in retrospect on why she's able to navigate the situation and survive while the world burns.
Hey there, Comic Clan. Did you know that Comics in the Cross are also on Patreon as well? For as little as just $2 a month, you can get access to all of our content from YouTube early before it drops here. That includes reviews for our comic books, tabletop gaming and video game channels, as well as the Indie Comic Book Club and our Let's Talk Comic interview show. Also, there is exclusive content available just to our Patreon subscribers. That includes watch-alongs, interviews, and a lot of behind-the-scenes information and goings-on in Comics in the Cross. If this sounds like something you'd be interested in checking out, then please go and check out the link for patreon.com/comicsinthecross. And if you do choose to support us and partner with us, then we are super grateful for that. And thank you so much for your kind and generous support. But for now, that's all from me. Let's head on back into your video.
So there's a lot of interesting elements that are there, and they're all very, very like intentionally planted, and we kind of use them. That's basically the philosophy of how we wrote this entire story arc. Is a very much like, we're just throwing you in, we're tossing everything at you, we're making you ask questions, but things are going to start all of a sudden making sense, and you're going to go, oh, that's why. And when you look back, you're like, and that's why this happened, and that's why. So that's how everything is constructed, but we're going to kind of force our readers to earn it, right?
Yeah.
The way that Danny does.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think there's anything wrong with telling a story in that way of like, no, you... It's almost like, and I mean this in the best possible way, but it's almost like the MCU method of like, no, it's like if you hang on for the whole ride, there's a payoff at the end for those that are here for the whole thing. We're not going to give you a payoff right off the bat and say like, you know, this is the whole story and this is the whole way the world works. It's like, but if you hold on for like, I don't know how long the current run you've got is on this. Obviously you talked about hopefully getting it renewed, but I don't know if it's like a 12 issue run or whatever they're doing. But if you hold on to the end of this run, like, you're going to get the payoff for sticking with us for this length. And hopefully beyond that, hopefully if it gets renewed, like, you get to do that beyond that. And like, well, you've been reading since we started, so here's the payoffs happening now in our second story arc and beyond, you know.
Yeah.
It's like I think that's the thing. There's not very much, and funnily enough, I was thinking of it in the world of TV, like you guys coming from animation. There's almost a storytelling perspective now of rush to get all of that stuff out.
Yeah.
Because the honest truth is, we don't know if we're coming back for a second season.
Yeah.
So we need to rush to explain everything that's going on because we might never get to tell the story. And it might just get shelved after this, or if you're unlucky enough, it might never even see the light of day. You know, so you want to tell that, and it's like I appreciate the gamble almost of saying like no, you have to hang on and wait. You know, because that's the thing, is like in a world where it is all about selling stuff, like if you sell it, Mad Cave might turn around and go, yeah, this series just isn't doing good, we're going to go with a different one of your series. And it's like, to take the gamble and go, no, we're going to like make you wait and we're going to tell the story and we're going to pace it out, like it's really good storytelling. It's really well done. It's awesome to see someone taking that step of like that. No, we know what we're doing. Just trust us. We know what we're going to get to it.
Like I feel like what you're saying is accurate, not just to TV but also comics. Like there is because comics, the industry, the margins are low, right? This is not a secret, right? These publishers aren't making bank. So every choice they make is very high risk. At the same time, and this goes into completely outside of our own things, this is just like business philosophy. I think it's a huge mistake the way that publishers are really optimizing, like you said, for like this has to feel like a one-off. It's true that a series needs to feel like, if you bought 6 issues of something or 5 issues, it needs to feel self-contained enough so that by the end you're like, even if it doesn't continue, man, this was a good ride and at least I got some closure. It's not I just ended in a cliffhanger. That's a different kind of take. So you do need to walk that fine line. But if I think about what got me into any medium of storytelling, and I'm pretty sure the same goes to Elliot, like we went into stuff like a Spider-Man or an X-Men, or why do people last for 500, like episodes or X amount of volumes of One Piece? It's because you're drawn into this world and you want it to continue. You want to adventure with these characters. You are connecting to it. The journey matters more than reaching the goal. Very often, even when a finale is good, what you actually end up feeling is like, okay, this was a really good way to end it. And then there's the empty void inside, right? But it doesn't really matter. What really matters is that journey. I've watched so many things and read so many things and played so many things that even if I never got to the full closure because it didn't get a continuation, I would remember that one arc with a cliffhanger more than I would remember 5 seasons or 5 volumes of something that that ended on a meh, right? Or on a, I guess that's a fine way to end it. Like, so I feel like in general, you got to have confidence that your audience wants to be invested over time, that they care more about having that thrill and getting invested in a story and in its world enough to want more. Because once again, for us, and I won't go into specifics, but you guys know more than that, so I can tell the audience this. There are adaptations coming of this story, and you never know where the story is going to continue. Even if someone like Mad Cave goes like, what, we've done 6 and we're good. The story might continue in a different medium or in a different vertical. Like, in the end, our goal is to find an audience that loves this world, that enjoys these characters, that likes the vibe and wants to continue, right? Because if they're there, then we have a market, and we found the audience for the Last Wardens, and it will be able to continue in whichever medium finds the most audiences, because you want more of that story, you want more of that world. So I feel like it's worth the risk as opposed to trying to optimize things to like it has to be neatly tied, and then like, no, the things that got all of us into this is the fact that we felt like these characters are our friends, our buddies. We're on this journey with them. And we don't really want it to end that quickly. Even if it ends, we want to go through the full journey, not a nice little snippet, right? As nice as that is conceptually, I don't feel like it builds brand loyalty because everything feels very disposable, right? If a publisher does 1 million titles and they're all just limited series, then eventually you're like, I guess all of these are kind of the same. I'm gonna have 4 issues and then it's done. Like
Yeah.
you don't.
Yeah.
It doesn't draw you. There is no bigger universe or bigger like, and that's really I feel like what a lot of people are craving as consumers. So that's the push and pull. I feel like it's better to take the risk, still tell a good story, but leave a lot of room and be very clear. You want to do more, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and I think that's it. Speaking from at least from a personal perspective on this, and Nitro, I don't know if you can agree on this or not, but I'm very much in a place when it comes with comics of, like you said, there are a lot of limited series. Like I've got a list of stuff coming out that we're looking to review on the channel, and so many of them are like limited series that are out for short runs. And if that's what you're telling and that's your set story, fantastic. As long as you know what you're doing with it, that can be amazing. But the other end of it, you get stuff like where I've talked about it in the show plenty of times before, where I got so burned out on stuff like Marvel and DC because these are ongoing stories which are amazing, but there's no stakes.
Yeah.
Everything resets. Every year there's a big event that resets everything. And like, oh, Tony Stark died, but he's going to be back next year, so why should I care? You know, how many times has he died at this point? You know, I remember the death of Captain America being a big thing and the death of Superman. And it's like, they came back like within a year. And I'm like, why should I care? You're going to reset stuff. And I think that's a big thing. Like, speaking of like our other big side of thing that we do, obviously, is our tabletop stuff and our Dungeons and Dragons. Speaking as a DM, like the way my brain works, I only work in like long-term storytelling. I struggle with like doing a short-term like kind of campaign because I'm like, I like building stuff for characters and helping build stories that characters can build and seeing the evolution. Like we're almost at the end of our first campaign that I'm running.
Yeah.
But seeing to be able to look back on that those first few sessions and see the journey these characters have gone on and how it's actually evolved, the stories that they have told and the way that they've evolved and changed, and know that when we get to the end of that, we're giving a satisfying conclusion to this long story, and the end's coming at the right time. But you've been allowed to tell these stories, and I think that's, like you said, I think there is a craving for that, and there's a craving for that in media. So many people want, like, why are we seeing so many reboots and sequels and all this stuff? Because people want a quick payoff rather than thinking, is there a worthwhile story to tell? And I appreciate you guys wanting to do this with the Last Wardens and wanting to tell a story that, you know what, if this is done after 6 issues, then we had a great run with that, and we've done some stuff, we've got some more stuff on the way, and at the very least, we did it our way. If nothing else, we did it our way. But if it gets a push after that, it's like I know you're going to appreciate after issue 6 when we get into that second story arc of like, look, telling it that way was clearly worthwhile because you all are invested, you all are a part of this now, and you want to get more of it, and you want to see.
Exactly.
Like, I'm excited for the stuff you talked about. Like, Danny's a really strong character. I really hope by the time we get to the end of this story arc, and hopefully a second one, that she's not this person we've read in issue 1 and 2. I want to see how she changes and evolves, and how she connects with the Wardens, and how she starts to become part of that group. And holy crap, sorry, there's a storm going on outside my house. I just heard thunder and lightning, and I'm like, where did that come from? Dang. It's getting intense here, yeah.
Like, I'm in California. I don't know, man.
Yeah. Just rub it in, you and your sunshine, right? Just look, I'm in the other coast. It is not sunshine here right now, I can tell you. But yeah, that long-term storytelling is like, I think there is a craving for it. I think there is, because we don't get it.
Yeah, and a big part of it is, honestly, like, I feel it's a combination of fear because of the low margins, but also just bad product strategy, to be honest. A lot of publishers nowadays, I get the thinking, but it's like, we'll call it a limited series so that we don't have to commit, and then it feels less of a, I don't know, failure if we can't continue it halfway through. But that sends a very wrong message to consumers. It tells you that there's no urgency, right? Because if you're reading something and you're going like, oh, well, I guess it's like, limited series. You can read this whenever. Doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I'll just pick up the trade when it comes out. It's fine. It'll be done in 6 issues, you know.
Exactly. But if you feel like, wait a minute, this is an ongoing thing and people are liking it, or this publisher shows a lot of confidence in this, if I don't pick this up, it'll take me a longer, like there's a FOMO aspect to it that is justified. Because if something is good, someone showing confidence in it, you're kind of like, okay, I want to see what this is about. You're getting confidence because the publishers show confidence. Now, the way that comics as an industry works, and that's where the fear comes from, is, issue 1 goes, and then sales, like almost instantly slide down with issue 2. A lot of people just wait for the trade paperback, and they kind of stay stale. But here's the problem, right? I come from a background of video games and television and technology, so I've seen consumer behaviors on a very wide spectrum. But there is some consistency for things that work. And the fact is, much like people's flawed financial planning, you cannot think like this. It's on an endless curve of growth. That drop makes 100% sense. And if you want growth, that takes time. And it does take you doubling down for a while without seeing that. But the more you invest, if something works enough, it is worth the long-term investment. Because for a company like a publisher, no matter what, they care about growth. They do want to build franchises. They do want to play with other mediums, or they do want to play with different, like, for that you have to build an audience, and sometimes building an audience does take time. If they just look at, like, well, throughout the 6 issues, we stayed with the same audience, I'm like, well, you've already told them this is a limited series so that they don't have to worry about really anything. And you've told them that, fine, if you do a renewal, it's like another series. So your story already preps you for that. But even if you get that curve, that's fine. Because if you keep going, now people are starting to go, wait a minute, this is still going. So there has to be, I feel like there's a lot of, like, we're trying to do a lot, right? Let's throw everything at the wall and see what sticks, as opposed to going, let's do less with the same money, but invest in it over time and have confidence in our own franchises and our ability to grow them. And that has not been the strategy for most publishers, and it does come from a financial instability point of view, but it's backfiring, and I don't think it's ever going to work because it's kind of a downward spiral. So yeah, that's.
I feel like Cross and I have this conversation at least once a week. I grew up, obviously, the big two, Marvel and DC, and I'm a huge Spawn fan, so you can throw Image in there as well. But one of the things that I think they do really well is that connectivity, right, throughout the universe. Like, something will pay off that, was, a year or two, past. It'll pay off in the comic you're reading now. But I know one thing that it doesn't do well is just long form storytelling and just payoffs and stuff that actually has an impact. Because everything's constantly being reset. That's why we started reading indie comics, or I won't speak for you, Cross, but I'm pretty sure that's why you started reading indie comics, is because the stories feel like they actually matter. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? They feel like they actually matter. The stuff that happens in the story actually matters to the story. And going back to D&D, like, we work so hard building these characters, and Cross, you work so hard building the world that the characters fit into. And then when something happens to the character that fundamentally changes them, they carry that with them through the story.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I really like about indie comics. But I think you can also swing too far in that area to where, that's all you focus on, as opposed to there is some connectivity that is important and payoffs that's important. So it's really cool to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, no, and I think that's D&D is actually a very good, like, tabletop gaming, or any story-driven gaming is a really good example to see what consumers are actually interested in. You do want to feel invested. You want to feel like the thing you're getting into is something that both the creators and the publishers really care about, and that they want to tell you more, and that if you get into something early, there is a reward for you.
Yeah,
because you're an early adopter. You were there when it started, and you can tell all the, like, we're all nerds. Like, this is what we love, right? This is exactly what we nerd out about. And I feel like losing sight of that because of low confidence or because of low sales in the short run, like, if you end up spending the same budget per year, I say do less and more of it. I also think that there's a big miss when it comes to publishers really needing to focus a lot more on international distribution. And again, this is looking at like general trends of how people consume media now. You never know where a product is really going to hit or where a story will, and it is so unpredictable.
Wow.
There's this Cartoon Network executive that I optioned a show to before, and he's been great. And Cartoon Network is gone. We're still friends. He was telling me about one of their biggest franchises. I'm not even going to name it. One of their biggest franchises that sells a lot in consumer products, and he said that at some point they sent him to a different country. I'm keeping the details vague on purpose. They sent him to a different country where he was never before, but he was going to do a talk because he was a Cartoon Network executive. When he got there, he went like, "Oh my God, this franchise is so much bigger here than anywhere else in the world, and I have no idea why. It doesn't actually make sense with its identity, with them, nothing. It just became so big that he's like, I'm seeing adults wear the T-shirts. It's like, this is insane, and I never even knew about this. And it's just because, I don't know, this is where we found our audience, right?
Yeah.
I feel localization nowadays is where a lot of publishers should be looking at, and I feel like the way that they're doing it is backwards from a business development point of view, but that's because it's always like, let's only the things that we do really well on, those are the things that we should push out. And I'm like, that is stupid as hell. There's a lot of reasons for that, but I really do think that the market is going to go through some serious shifts because the consumers are speaking with and without their money.
Yep.
I think that's it. I think we're at a point where it has to go through that sort of shift. Like, you know, there's only so long you can stick to this model and stick to this way of doing things. And like, oh, what's bringing in the most money? What's doing this? What's doing that? It's like, there's only so many times you can go back to the well, you know, not to throw too much slander their way, you know, in case they ever want to sponsor us or something. But, you know, it's like, we just saw like D23 from Disney, and like, how many announcements were sequels and follow-up movies, and you're thinking in your head, does this really need to happen? Like, does Toy Story 5 need to be a thing? Like, I'm sorry, I'll die in that hill. It doesn't need to exist. You know, it's like, but you know what I mean? Like, we're going to go back to those, but it's like, because nobody wants to take a risk. But how did you get to where you are? It was taking risks on properties that, like you said, are not going to give you that financial success right away. But
it's a long-term investment.
You know, it's like, if you get past that first, like the first story arc, you get past that first, you know, the first few months of a TV show or the first release of a movie, how many have been successful? How many have bombed in the theater? And then have been successful, like cult hits? Like, the one that hits my mind is Shawshank Redemption, one of my favorite movies of all time. It completely crapped out at the box office and is one of the most beloved movies of all time now, because it got a cult following later.
Family Guy got cancelled twice.
Yeah, it got cancelled twice, and it's in like season 20 what now? 30 what now? It's like, it's still going to this day. Whether or not you think that's a good thing is completely up to yourself, you know, but it's like, it's still going to this day, and it's like, you never know where something's going to be successful. And then even as well, it's interesting you saying that, like, you also, for these companies, which most of these big publishers are American companies, it's like, you also need to look at a worldwide market. We are a more interconnected world than ever. I mean, just sitting here in this conversation with us, we've got multiple nationalities talking, you know. You know, I mean, you were raised in Israel. I'm originally from Scotland. You guys are from the US. Like, there's multiple nationalities sitting here in this conversation that are all comic lovers. You don't know where your market is. The world is so much smaller than it's ever been. Like, I don't even need to go and pick up something. I can literally get a comic created from anybody else in the world just by finding it online, and there's multiple ways to do that. It's like, you can't just take those initial sales as a thing of like, oh, that's his sign of success. And I'm like,
and I feel like there's a lot of just not looking, and that's a very MBA-ish way of thinking, but there's not looking at why something that works. And I think in comics, a good example of that is manga. So I personally, huge advocate for anime and manga. I wrote my master's thesis more than 12 years ago, literally, about, hey, this is tapping into a demographic that the US industry is completely ignoring, and it's going to be huge. And I can tell you, I shouted at executives and no one listened. And but one of the things that I feel like even comic industry is doing in a very dumb way right now is they're looking at manga as a separate subgenre, right, on its own, which is such a flawed way of thinking because they're not actually thinking of why it resonates and what it taps into. When you're talking to consumers or to fans, right, you are hearing a very different story of why they gravitated towards the medium. And the default thinking is like, oh, they're going for it because manga is popular right now, because manhwa is popular right now, because this thing that we identify as a Japanese or Korean medium is popular. That's not why, right? What you need to look at is like, who's your demographic? Why did they gravitate towards that? What did you not have that this did?
Yeah.
And the question would actually be very, very revealing, because when you talk to anime and manga fans, what you actually come down to isn't the fact that it's manga or anime. That is by extension, and it can be trendy. It is more of the fact that they covered the demographic and the types of stories and the types of tone that nobody else did. And that's what every big anime or manga fan in the 90s, when it started becoming more popular in the West in general, you watch stuff like Ghost in the Shell and Akira and went like, there is nothing like this in the American market. If you're a teen, right? The fact that there is an entire demographic that shonen manga is specifically for teens, that still doesn't exist here. Now we're calling YA this fuzzy thing, but we still haven't quite defined what it is. Like, it's an entire age demographic that has been ignored, that wants stories that have more depth, violence, sexuality, exploring all of these things in a very serious way that feels epic. Like, it is the types of stories, it is how they're told, it is the drama, like the thing that drew people in. And the only thing that people picked up from it is like, oh, we need to now do manga. Because if what we do reads as manga, we will get manga consumers. Not realizing that manga and anime consumers consume a lot of things that aren't manga and anime. They just so happen to go to manga and anime because they're looking for something specific. And as a consumer of that medium as well, same applies to me. I don't only consume manga or anime. I consume a million different things. But when I go to manga or anime, I am looking for something specific, right? For a specific emotional hit.
It's funny you mentioned that. I had a conversation with one of my friends the other week, and they are not anime fans. And I said, I bet you money I could find one that you would just absolutely love. Because anime is not, it's not a genre. Like, it encompasses all genres.
Yeah.
And I'm not into manga really, but I would assume the same thing with manga. It encompasses all genres. And one of my favorite ones right now it's Demon Slayer, just because it's currently running. You look at the characters in Demon Slayer and the character arcs in Demon Slayer with like Tanjiro and his sister Nezuko, and just the relationships that they're able to build in those shows and how it speaks to human empathy. Dude, I love that show. It's such a good show. Tanjiro is one of my favorite protagonists of all time. But just the ability to build, like, for instance, for Tanjiro, his ability to empathize with the worst, vile people on the earth, his ability to have empathy for them is a human characteristic I think a lot of people should have, to be able to empathize with people. And I feel like anime as a whole is able to, cross genres, and it just the ability to be able to tell a really good story is really the only thing that matters.
Yeah. And it's the topics as well, and it's the hardness, and it's stuff that you don't find in media here that they just defaulted to doing for, and you can go deep into reasons as to why. It doesn't really matter. But nobody's actually looking at that. They're trying to imitate the style and the trend.
Yeah.
That is a huge miss, because guess what else really applies to manga? It is that long form. People who get into manga and anime, they're very arc-based.
Yeah.
Right? And that's how we structure our stories as well. They are very story arc based, but there is a vision for the bigger story. Many of them do have an ending, the best ones. Always have an ending, and when you get there, usually
Yes.
you'll get what you paid
Yes.
for. And you get that satisfaction. And once again, that reaction you're having right now, that we're both having, that's why we're going there. And part of it is when you start one of these series, even if you know there's 50 episodes, and that's it.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a journey,
Yeah.
right? The
Yeah.
5 arcs are going to be a journey, or they're going to end it in 6. Like, that is why you're investing time. When people go into a store to buy manga, they are looking at all of these volumes. There's a reason why this works there, and it is that type of storytelling, and it is that type of commitment over time, and it does build the audience organically. But if you're a manga consumer, you're going into the store, and now there's 3 volumes of this thing, you're starting to go, maybe I should catch up on this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we're missing all of this, right? So that's something that I feel publishers should look at very, very differently.
That's a really good point, though. Yeah.
I think a lot about this.
Can't
I'm a
tell.
little.
No, absolutely. And I think that's it. I think it is a kind of, it's almost a lost art form in a lot of the Western world, but in comics, since we're specifically talking about that, like you said, just how much it can hit just walking into a store and seeing like all the volumes of something sitting there and thinking, is this something I should check out?
Yeah.
You know, is this something I should get into? And I always find it something that you never kind of get that with anything now of like a perfect ending for something. It's always like stuff either goes on long past after it should have ended and you're like, this really should have stopped here.
Yeah.
Or it gets cut off short and you're like, we're never going to get the conclusion that we wanted for that. And it's like to have an idea of like where this is going, what's happening with it, where we're going to take this story, and a conclusion to it is, we underestimate how powerful that is to actually have that in media in the West here. We don't get allowed to see that stuff, you know?
I do feel like if you get caught up in the middle of a story and you really want more and you'll never get it, but man, that like one volume or that one season was so freaking good, that sadness is worth it on its own.
Yeah.
I would agree. Yeah, I would agree.
But also, I think as well, we miss out on the fact of like, it creates a connection with people. Why we tell these stories as a connection. Like the first thing that pops to mind, and I'll always be one of the things that pops to mind of stuff getting cut short, is obviously Firefly. One of the TV shows for like 20 plus years we've been talking about. I've been a huge fan of it for a long time. But I still talk to people today that are fans of the medium. Boom Studios is still putting out Firefly comics to this day because there's fans there that are wanting to read it, that are wanting to immerse it. Like I literally got to review one a couple of weeks ago. It's like, it's still going out. It's why? Because people connected with the property. And even though it got cut short, even though it got cancelled, people looked at that and went, that's something I'm involved in. That's something I'm invested in, and still consider themselves browncoats, still consider themselves fans of the property. And I think we miss out in making those connections because people in publishing, we cut the story short, and it's like, you've already got, by the time like Last Wardens or any other book is coming out, by the time you get to the end of that first arc, by the time the last issue is written, done, sent to the publisher, hitting the press, you've already got at the very least a base fan base there.
Yeah.
to
build
upon.
If nothing else, you've got that core base of like, this is people who are now invested in that book, who want to see more of that book, who would love to talk to people about that book, who are wanting to connect with other fans of it. And if that book never gets more than that one arc, there's still going to be people that go like, oh, you need to check out this comic, pull it off the shelf, hand it to people and want to give it over. Like, you know, that's one of the reasons we started doing stuff like the Indie Comic Book Club that we do on here, was to, hey, there's this amazing mass of these indie comics we've never read. Let's check them out. And there's still comics that we've read part of that I will 100% recommend to people to this day. The first one we ever reviewed was Lock and Key.
Incredible.
I had never checked that book out before we did our first episode of Indie Comic Book Club. And it's one of the first series we recommend to anyone who wants to get into indie comics. Like, go check out Lock and Key. You're going to love it. You saw the Netflix show? Ignore that. Go read the comic. It's better. It's like...
Yeah. But that's exactly the sentiment, right? Like, you want to create that one. And the truth is, it's worth doing for authors like us anyway, because let's say that we've done this and you have like a core fandom of Last Wardens and they consume all the iterations, whatever we produce out of it, and then all of a sudden it gets cut. Because we are prolific and we keep making more things, then that audience is a lot more likely to go, well, even if they got cut short on this, I know they will continue making more things.
Yeah.
You become a fan of the next thing you advocate. But the same thing happens the other way around. People find out your new book and go, well, I love this. What else did these people do? And they look back and they go, oh my God, Last Wardens, did it get more? Why didn't it? And all of a sudden, you're getting discovery after the matter. Yeah. And at some point, and this is once again a big loss for a lot of publishers, because publishers very often, they don't necessarily own IP rights. Great for creators, right? Great for us. But if you've lost your exclusivity on doing this series and it found its audience a few years later, well, guess what? The creators can continue doing it with whoever they want on whatever terms that they want. And you have lost your ability to grow because you didn't have the confidence to invest over time. That short-term thinking is going to continue backfiring until the people in publishing starts realizing that they can't double down on old methodologies or just react to what's in front of them. The market has changed so significantly. And they have to listen to the fandom above all, because these are your consumers. You have to listen to not just what they buy, but what they don't buy from you and what they do buy from others. And analyzing that is not always one-to-one. Again, the manga problem. Oh, people like manga. I'm like, yes, but...
Right? But there's more to it than that.
It's deeper than that,
Exactly. And whoever manages to harness into that, whoever manages to really, honestly, like, publishers have not been smart about how they handle localization, given the tools that we just have available right now technologically. Easier than ever. But it's a different way of thinking from the way that they're thinking right now. That's a different topic. But all of these things have been on both our minds, and they have affected how we strategize on everything. But we have our own vision, and we do think that long term, and we hope that it's going to pay off, because you are building fandom that cares and that knows what you're trying to do, and that knows that given the chance, stick around long enough, advocate for something long enough. Like you said, all of a sudden you have comics of Firefly coming out all these years later. These things do tend to pay off over time. So hopefully.
Something I kind of want to follow up with it then, especially speaking with like the way a lot of the publishers are kind of reacting to stuff, and they're kind of moving in certain directions and doing short term. Like you said, a lot of people are really kind of just holding on to their own IPs and kind of taking things into their own hands. How did you guys specifically get connected, like with Mad Cave and bringing stuff out with Mad Cave Studios, and choose to go that direction? Because I'm thinking specifically, like, there's so many that do self-publishing now and launch Kickstarters. Like, we just spoke to, we talked about it earlier, we just spoke to David Pepos a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things we talked to him about was the OZ, a comic he's done through Kickstarter, and I just picked up another amazing comic, Monkey, through a Kickstarter, and there's a lot of amazing stuff out there. What led you guys, and how did you guys get connected with Mad Cave and doing your work with them, rather than, like you said, kind of like just going your own direction with it? What was that kind of process?
Yeah, I mean, that was, Elliot, if you want to jump in, or I can jump in for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, you're probably the more proficient one to answer that one.
Sure. And so like from a purely business perspective, I mean, okay, from pragmatic perspective, Mad Cave specifically is because I knew Mark Irwin from years prior through a mutual friend, and we've talked before, and he's consulted when I was basically looking into producing comics years ago. I have done some work in this, and he was very, very helpful. And because we actually started working with Humanoids as our first publisher, right, which the books are going to come out after, but still we're working with them, right? We were looking to expand just our slate. We're like, okay, with Humanoids, we have a kind of a brand almost like with them. We're doing titles that have a very specific vibe to it. And we wanted to do titles like Wardens or Eden Frost, which did not fit with the same vibe. And we're like, okay, who else is out there? Let's diversify.
Yeah.
And I think at the time, Mad Cave were very small. And Mark Irwin just joined Mad Cave. He was like, he came from IDW. And I was just like, oh, and he just announced it. I'm like, let's talk to them. Let's see what they're all about.
Yeah.
So we got familiar with what they're trying to do very, very early in the process. And we loved it. And honestly, they've been amazing partners. Like they are probably, for creators, the best publisher out there right now in terms of just a working partner. They've been phenomenal. So we're big fans of their work. We're big fans of the people there, and from marketing to sales to pretty much everything that they do. We got lucky because again, we had that connection early on. Who we pitched Last Wardens to at first. That's literally how it started. That led to Eden Frost, and that just led to more extensive partnerships over time that are carrying over. Because once you like working together and you deliver as creators and as partners and as team members, like it builds a relationship, right? And we're very fortunate to have that. So that's with them specifically. With the choice of not going independent, it does come from, and I'm sure there's everything that I'm saying is purely opinion, right? So there is no right or wrong here. It's purely like the philosophy that we're running with. But a lot of it, of course, comes from observing trends and behaviors tied to our own experience in media. For me specifically, I've designed entire authoring systems that rely heavily on analytics. So I'm actually I'm used to looking at analytics and analyzing user behavior and stuff like that. So a lot of my philosophies also come from that. And you can kind of see it in the way that I talk about this. But the weird thing I think that to me came out of the whole, there's a nice thing about the idea of Kickstarter. So like, oh, you could just get your audience to fund it and you could do it yourself and yada yada. There are a lot of major flaws. Depending on what your goals are, there's a lot of major flaws of going with that path that I think, A, people severely underestimate, and B, may not be as worth it depending on what you want to do. And that sounds big. I'll explain what I mean. So the biggest problem with comics in general, and that's where we kind of started. We started talking about like, how did you hear about this? Marketing, right? Finding out about a new book is difficult. Kickstarter nowadays is not really a platform for the indies. That's the truth. Sure, indies can get funded to do little things. Kickstarter is for anybody who already has an audience. If you already have an audience, your Kickstarter will get whatever financing you need to finish it. People look at the success stories as the example, as opposed to like the thing that usually connects a lot of the big success stories as these are people who already have a following.
Yeah.
Right? If you do not have a following, your odds of closing a Kickstarter campaign are not good. It's a full-time job it's like political campaigning to get something closed. So right off the bat, that is a huge commitment. And it's very hard to get any significant amount of financing that actually allows you to do something. If you have a big following, that's your shortcut, right? You earned it. You've worked X amount of years. People are used to your work. They are more likely to fund you. Good. So that's already a big filter because most people don't have that following and will not get funded. So at that point, they aim very low with their amount. So what they can actually afford is, so I'll finish 2 issues and then it's done. I mean, it doesn't be, and that leads to the second part. Even if you manage to get whatever you got funded because all you needed was this kind of amount because you're aiming low, you're like, I just need to get it done. I'll get it out there. Then the sales will continue paying for it. Then you're facing reality number 2. Marketing it. If you do not have a publisher, you do not have a path to get it to where things actually sell the most. So sure, you can maximize profits, but how are you going to get it to 600, 700, 1,000 stores? You're not. Because you're not going to individually reach out to Diamond and Lunar and like set up an entire pipeline for like, no. So you're just going to sell it online. And unless you have a big install base that is willing to convert to, I'm just going to pay for it, you're going to have 20 people buy it. And that's kind of the end of it.
Yeah.
Right. And the whole thing dies because marketing is probably one of the most important things in this field that nobody is able to really just crack because it's difficult nowadays. Right, we're dealing with a world of social media. The way we consume things and the way we decide to purchase things has been continuously shifting nonstop. But it is what makes or breaks your product, right? When we started talking, you were literally talking about like, oh, because I constantly saw your guys' email, active on social media, that drew my attention. I reached out. That is a lot of work, right? And most people do not have that kind of power. And even if you do, the big gap between I caught the attention of 100 people to I made enough money to be able to actually keep this thing going over time, that is galaxies apart.
Yeah.
So while it's true that it's never been easier to distribute stuff, and it's true that it's never been easier to try and find your audience or put stuff on Kickstarter or even get stuff funded, actually standing out has not gotten any easier. Not really. And your best chance, especially if you're, look, we're experienced entertainment professionals and we have all these big credits. At the end of the day, as far as creators go, we're new, right? We're evergreen. And we recognize that coming in. Like, we have a lot to justify. We need to build audience trust. You can make a great book and bring it out there, but people are going like, yeah, but I don't know you. You know, you haven't done enough yet so that I have confidence. You might just be a kind of like come and go, right? So you need to build that confidence over time. Unless you've already done that, you're in a very, very small group, and it's very hard to make that be worth it. So you'll get the satisfaction of getting an issue out, 2 issues out through Kickstarter, and that's going to be the end of it. To me, working with a publisher solves, at the very least, that issue to some extent if it's a good partner, because they will take on a pretty large investment of funds in your thing because they want to sell books. They are incentivized to market it for you.
Yeah.
So you already have some marketing. Even if you, like us, compensate for trying to make it even bigger by marketing a lot yourself, you have a partner who's just as invested. They're putting sweat equity, and you want that. You want them to go like, well, I have invested this much to have the exclusive rights to do this comic for the next 5 years, and I want to sell these books. I have to pay off $50,000 that I put into this. I'm gonna try, right? That's good, because they're gonna get your name out there. They're gonna put the press releases. They're gonna set you up on panels. They're gonna expose the audience to you. That's a really good deal, right? That's a really good crutch. In many ways, the first deal that you're ever going to sign is always going to be the shittiest. When you get bigger and you have an audience and you essentially have options, if you're big enough so you can say like, I'm just going to put something on Kickstarter, then I know I'm going to get it funded however much I want. And then I already know all the people in Diamond, and I can just go to Image and they're just going to pick, great, you're in the 1% of the people who can do that. And that's a very, very small group. For the rest of us, I think that using what publishers offer, if they're good partners, that's a big caveat because a lot of them are not, it solves a lot of problems for you. And it sometimes is worth certain sacrifices, in my opinion. Because having a partner that already has the established pipeline into stores, I mean, getting retailers to carry your book is a struggle because retailers are struggling, right? So they don't like taking risks. And they need to see that, and if you get validated by working with a bigger publisher, that already helps. It helps them as well. They're like, okay, we have people who are fans of Mad Cave books. So I'm going to look at their titles and I'm going to look at their new creators because I trust Mad Cave, even if I don't have the creator yet. So I don't feel like we can be as arrogant as to like, no, but it's my thing. And I'm like, if you're a one-trick pony and that's your only story, then good luck doing anything in entertainment. right? You have to really commit to it. And to us, that choice was a very strategic business choice that came out of us going, this is our best chance to get known, to be able to network with people. Like, you guys found out about us because you follow Man Cave.
Yeah.
That's a perfect example of it. Like, a lot of people find out about what we do and our titles because they follow the brand that they now trust and that they like their work. That's huge. And people do not realize how big it is, because as artists, we always prefer to think about the merit as opposed to being honest about how we going when we go into a store.
Yeah.
Or when we're on Netflix, and what we tend to automatically gravitate towards, whether we're proud of it or not. And that's something that if you're on the product design side, you're very well aware of.
Yeah.
No, it's
So
yeah, that's a very I'm trying to think of the right word, and that's something that's definitely taken a consideration that we don't always think about. Like, you know, just walking into your local comic store and going to like the wall of like new releases for that week, and there's two things that typically grab your attention: is either it's a brand that you recognize, whether you're going and picking up something that you know, like Spider-Man or Batman or something like that, where it's a character, or like you said, it's, oh, here's a new book that comes out. Like, I know one of the first things that catches my eye is like if I see a new book from Image.
Yeah.
I know the quality of Image books, and I'm like, oh, well, if they've put enough faith to publish something, then it must be something that's worthwhile publishing, because they don't just take everybody there. So I'm going to go and check it out and see. You know, that's why so many people put in such faith in doing like cover art as well, because you're like, you don't know who I am. Here's a cover that will catch your attention. Here's something that will make people go, oh, what's that?
Yeah, that looks awesome. Yeah.
That's like what draws people in. And yeah, a trusted brand name, you're honestly right. Like, yeah, Kickstarter, like if you don't have that following to make however many thousands you need, even just to print the books, it's like, let alone anything else, and pay people and do whatever else you need to do.
You got to use any advantage you have. I mean, we had in San Diego Comic-Con, Elliot was brilliant. He basically, like, we had somebody who came in to our booth. You'll probably remember that. She worked on Bob's Burgers. She had big Louise ears on her, right? Nice. And we're just standing in the booth and we're signing copies. And he very rightfully basically said, like, hey, like, those are cool ears. I work on Bob's Burgers. She ended up buying a copy. And guess what? I mean, she might enjoy it. She might become a fan. But the fact that at that moment, the thing that validated what we were doing was because she's like, oh, this is a person who works on the thing that I like.
Yeah.
And that's human nature. There's no shame in that. But we have to be honest about how we are as people. We are rightfully.
No, it's true though. It's very true. It's like when you, like, even just within the comic book medium itself, how much more likely are you to pick up a book because you know the writer, or you know the artist, and you know what you're getting and what you're in for. You know, again, speaking of David Pepos, when we spoke to him, like, he sent us out Space Ghost when he released the first issue of that to review from Dynamite. I never checked out Space Ghost before. I was not like a nostalgic fan for Space Ghost. It was not something I was looking for. But I read and reviewed the issue because I knew it was from David Pepos. I knew his work. I knew what he'd done before. I knew I'd enjoyed his work. So I'm like, okay, I'll check it out. And when we spoke to him, I said it to him, like, this is probably one of my favourite books I'm reading now. I don't know why. I don't know who this guy is, but I'm enjoying the story I'm reading. And it's like, to try something brand new is a risk, and kind of like to go back to what we were talking about with all like the corporations making their sequels and their reboots and everything, is because they know people are scared to take risks on new properties. Exactly right. People like something that's tried and tested. Don't get me wrong, there's a whole other side of that, of it being run into the ground, but yeah, like
that's Toy Story 5.
You know, but like, even just to like talking to you guys, I'm more likely to go and read whatever your next comic is that comes out, whatever one it happens to be that finally gets released next. You know, I'm more likely to go and check it out because I'm like, oh yeah, that's the guys that did Last Wardens.
Yeah, again, thank you, and that's the goal. But that has to be earned for us.
Yeah,
we have to earn it. Right? We have to earn consumer trust, and it is a lot easier with a publisher, because that's already one filter that people have to look through. Like, how often do you just see a Kickstarter from a writer or artist you completely don't know? It can be the most beautiful thing you've ever seen in your life, but you don't know the artist, you don't know the writer, you don't know anything about this, and you're like,
there's that thing in the back of your head, like, I don't know. Even like everything you see in front of you is amazing. You're like, I don't know.
yeah.
Oh yeah, like even you saying that, Nitro, we literally did that. One of the first Kickstarters.
Oh gosh.
Was that a Kickstarter or like an Indiegogo that we backed? And like we literally backed
It was
this
awful.
book. It sounded like a great story. It sounded like an amazing thing. We went, okay, we'll check this out. We got the book in.
We got the Mamma Jamma ones too, like the $50 like hard cover comic.
This is for anyone watching. This is a learning curve. If you don't know the person, do not buy the deluxe edition on their Kickstarter. I don't care what the hell it is. Don't do it. It is not worth it. We got that book. The writing was god awful and the art was horrific.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
we won't. We're not going to name it. But
not going to put. I'll be honest. I couldn't name it if I tried. I've blocked everything about it out of my head at this point.
See, Cross actually threw his away. I actually still have mine on my shelf because I can't like, logically get rid of it knowing that I paid $50.
I couldn't in all good conscience have it sitting. I've got all my comics sitting back there, all my trades, and I'm like, I couldn't consciously put that on a shelf with stuff I actually like. I'm like, no, I refuse. It's in the trash. It's not worth it.
But that makes a lot of sense though. Like, you know, knowing somebody that has created something and knowing the track record and knowing that they've produced in the past makes you much more likely to buy something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you know what? You worked hard for those $50, and if you're going to spend them,
you want to get something that you know you're going to enjoy.
Yeah. And I feel like as creators, we tend to be very flippant about it. We're like just pissed off. Oh, why don't people just get originals? Like, let's be honest. We all have in us that tendency, and it doesn't come from a far-fetched place. It's from a malicious place.
Yeah. It's a familiarity thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Familiarity. People go with familiarity.
We enjoy comfort. It's like a comfort food. It's like a comfort thing. It's like, I'm literally thinking of my wife who, like, I've tried to get her to sit down and watch so many brand new TV shows with me and she won't. But she's finishing watching Gilmore Girls for the 15th time. You know, it's like, why? Because that's her comfort show. That's what she enjoys. And it doesn't matter that she's seen it before. It doesn't matter that she knows everything that's going to happen. It's like, that's where she gets her comfort. And it's like, you know, it's one of those things of like, we do. And I think that's it. I think it's, you guys have brought up something really great with that, of there is a comfort to that. And just alone saying like, hey, we're going to do this through Mad Cave and we're going to be connected with them. Like you said, well, there's already an audience. If anyone's a fan of Mad Cave stuff, like us, for example, go into a store and you see Last Wardens. Oh, look, there's a Mad Cave thing on it. Must be one of their new ones.
Yeah.
I'm more likely to grab that and think this could be something that's worthwhile. And at the very least, check out the first issue. And I mean, if it's crap from there, you're not going to pick up the rest of the series. But it at least gets the foot in the door of like, hey, these people are checking out a number one that they might never have thought of picking up.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's a very long way to answer that pretty concise question.
It's fine. I told you we go down rabbit trails and tangents. Okay. It happens quite frequently. But no, it's a really good talking point.
So there you go.
And that's why Demon Slayer is the best anime ever. I'm just joking.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, we had to cut out the 5-hour rant in between there, folks. Don't worry about it. But no, it's like, I know we went on a massive tangent there with all of that stuff, and I'm like, but it is really interesting. Like, that's something that I think is very intriguing to myself and Nitro, that there's something about like learning about the actual creation process of comics. Like, you know, it's like, it's not just about the comics themselves, although the stories are great. Like, what is it like? Why do people make the choices they do? Why have they opted for the stuff they have? And it
varies so much from creator to creator as well.
Yeah.
You know, so like, I think going into a big, you know, tangent like that and stuff is like, but you hit some really good meaty things in there of like, that makes perfect sense. Why not to do certain things? Why you make certain choices, and why, you know, we go certain ways.
Yeah, I feel it's worth thinking about for creators when they choose their path. Is like, what is your goal and what's your difficulty? Like, what is the biggest challenge you have to conquer? Yeah. And I really think that being able to get to your audience, really get to them, is the biggest one. And the internet is a crapshoot.
Yeah.
There's so much stuff out there, and anything that helps you stand out
Yeah.
and validate you and filter is absolutely critical.
Mm,
You can put
that's a good
something on
point.
Amazon and no one will see it, no matter how much effort. Great that you own this IP fully, but between you and the 5 people that you managed to get to buy it. So
Yeah.
how worth is that ownership in the end of the day?
Yeah.
Like, but that requires a slightly different, I feel like, way of thinking and a slightly different business philosophy as well. That is a little bit long term of going like, I will sacrifice some things and get others, because there
Mhm.
are advantages and disadvantages when it comes to intellectual property rights as well.
Yeah.
People are really focused on like, no, I have to own everything, and I'm like, okay, but then your partner that's publishing you is far less incentivized.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
What do they get from it, right? So there is a lot of stuff that, once again, coming from a different background or from different philosophies, like, it varies.
Yeah.
But people should be questioning these things because the media landscape isn't what it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago.
That's really cool. Yeah, you don't get, or I'll speak for us. We don't get to hear the business side per se as much from, from a comic creation standpoint. So it's really cool to hear that point of view. Like,
Yeah.
it's like, if you don't have if you don't have a fan base that's already established that you're plugging into, or a demographic, or a publisher, or some sort of hook that resonates with an already established audience, you're making your life more difficult,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's hard to reach your audience because it's, I mean, we don't live in a meritocracy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. No matter how good your work is, and like we said before, like, you could go on Kickstarter and see the sweetest looking art. The sample pages, oh, the story sounds incredible. And you're like, but there's that thing. I don't know these people. I don't, they have no track record. Like, do I really
Yeah,
want to put my hard-earned money into this? I don't know.
Yeah.
exactly. And will I do this, or am I more likely to just buy the thing that I know I already like? Oh, the next Spider-Man. I know, no matter
Yeah.
how bad it gets, it's still Spider-Man. It's gonna be
I'm
like
gonna go
that,
pick up issue number 358 of Spawn. So
right? Exactly. Which, when you
yeah.
put it like that, you're like, okay, that sounds silly, but, no, but that's
Yeah.
how consumer behavior is. That's how we all think.
Mhm.
Pretending that that's not the case tends to backfire.
Yeah.
So I do think that a certain level of business literacy is important, because
Yeah.
any artist that I have seen a lot of like this, like, aversion to anything that has the word business on it.
Mhm.
But if you are an artist, you are a business.
Yeah.
You are a service provider, and you are a product seller. No matter what, you should at least understand who are the people that you are reliant on,
Mhm.
what is the current market, who is your consumer. Like, these are things that are worth knowing,
Yeah.
because you'll end up being smarter, and you'll also do a service for your partners. You're going to be a better partner, you're going to be a better creator, you're going to
Mhm.
be more successful in general, or
Yeah.
more likely to be successful. But
Yeah. Yeah, I
sure.
mean, I went to college for art, and one of the things that I wish they would have done is, like, make you get a business degree or a business minor, because obviously you're going to school for art. You want to make money. You want to make a living doing that, doing something that you love. And without that, like, acumen, that business acumen, it's really difficult.
Yep,
Like, it's just really difficult.
That
it's
rings a
hard.
bell with me, honestly.
Yeah.
So SBA went to school there for animation specifically. Obviously, no business classes, none of
Yeah.
that. But hilariously, they also taught, like, it was informative. I won't crap on it too much, but
Yeah.
they taught the traditional paper and pencil way of how to do animation. I had to learn,
Wow.
back in the day, it was Flash animation that was digital, but
Yeah.
like I had to learn that myself. I
Wow.
was like, oh, with this I'm not. It's just not efficient enough to do this on paper anymore, and no one's
Yeah.
doing it anymore. So I took it upon myself to basically, like, oh, that's what they're doing. I'm gonna have to do this a completely different way all by myself.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really wish obviously that extends to business classes alone, because that would be really helpful back then.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think one of the best classes that my undergrad school forced, and we were the first year they tried this on. They brought in a lawyer to talk about IP law.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
happened. And we were not expecting it, and everybody was like, "Okay, this is going to be something." So much sign up for that class, and just a bit like years later, I had to deal with patent lawyers and stuff like that because again, running a like essentially like a tech company. But that foundation and baseline gave me a lot of tools of just how to think about things. And
Yeah.
I never stopped thinking of how important that ended up being
Mhm.
because it really gives you that perspective in a less naive way.
Yeah.
And it forces you, no matter how much you don't like it, it forces you to also empathize in a different way with the people you're dealing with. Because no matter what, when you're pitching to someone, when you're asking to partner with someone, whether it's a publisher, no matter what the terms are, it's a partnership and it's a business one. And unless you understand the person you're dealing with, what are they worried about?
Yeah.
Like, how is their organization structured? When they decide to make a bet on you, what do they need to see more? What are their pain points? Like, reverting into or moving into that kind of thinking as opposed to, but what's good for me is kind of educational and
Yeah.
humbling. And it does make people want to work with you more because you are thinking of their best interests as well. And it was a big philosophy for us working together. Like, we're going to work with a publisher and man, we're going to deliver everything on a level of professionalism and we're going to go above and beyond,
Yeah.
right? Because we want them to look at us as partners that are worth investing in and investing extra in. Because in the end of the day, it is our creation, which I think is very different from like, I'm very like when it comes to like, hey, it's work for hire. Sure, we've worked on all these big shows. We don't own these shows. We don't control like the fact that you have animated or storyboarded on something. And in the end of the day, you are just a cog in a giant machine and you are working on somebody else's product. You do not have ownership of it. It's just a nice anecdote that you ended up working on it. But when it's your thing, you should care. And
Yeah.
you should want your partner to care just as much. And even if the thing doesn't do as well as you wanted it to, and as well as your partner wanted it to, in the end of the day, if they felt like, you know what, it just didn't find an audience, it didn't get sales, but by God, these guys, the service, they went above and I will work with them again. Because eventually it'll hit, and I know that the process itself is going to be fantastic, and they're going to give me all this extra because this is how much they care, which we do. So it also has to be very genuine. But I do feel like that's a shift that needs to happen from creators as well. Like understanding the pain points of the industry and why certain decisions are being made or the logic of what before you tear down a contract, understand like it might be a terrible contract, but you do have to understand why it was constructed with a certain way because it'll tell you a lot about what your essentially like investing partner is worried about or what they're experiencing. And that is educational because you might optimize differently. You might go, you know what, based on this, I can tell what they're really worried about is this. So maybe I'll be a little bit more flexible on this, not on this thing. That's my red line. But if I do this, if I give them this little, like peace offering, maybe they'll be more inclined to give me. That's negotiation. So I do feel like it's going to be better for everybody to have a little bit more awareness and a little bit just be more educated about these things because it changes the whole experience.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's my pitch.
It's a solid pitch. I mean,
I hope so.
All right, so just to kind of bring things to a close then, because we're hitting the over the 2 hour mark, as much as I would love to keep talking and stuff, I should probably try and bring the show to kind of some sort of end before people are looking at like a 5 hour video of us, which personally I'm fine for, but yeah, I don't know if the YouTube algorithm will enjoy that as much. Obviously, Last Wardens issue 2 is coming out on the 28th of August. I believe it officially hits stores. Last chance, pitch the book out to everyone that's listening. If they've not picked it up, why should they go and grab it in issue 1? Why should they go and pick this book up? Why should they add this to their pull list and as a must grab?
All right, let's both give our takes. I'll do the first take, then Elliot, you do yours. So
Okay.
I'll focus on the story itself. So The Last Wardens. It's essentially an action-packed supernatural horror story, and it has a lot of energy behind it. It's the story of Danielle Pryor. She's a small town girl living in this rustic fictional town of Bleakwood, Oregon, in 1975. It's a period piece, and her life is kind of shit. She has an alcoholic father and a hole in her wallet, and just one day her life goes from bad to worse when her long-lost brother Bruce, he returns from the Vietnam War after he was MIA and just presumed dead. But Bruce also brings something back with him. He's plagued by this mysterious and monstrous mutation, but that's also not the only thing that's haunting him. Like, Bruce is being hunted by this incompetent team of paranormal misfits, which leads Bleakwood to quickly become this ground zero of a supernatural battle that just forces Danielle to have to choose between everything she holds dear and the fate of the world as a whole. In terms of what I think like consumers or readers can expect, like, this story is very emotional. It's chaotic. It's action-packed. It is full of tragedy, comedy, and a fair amount of gratuitous violence. Underneath it all, it's also a mystery, right? So readers will go into this story through Danielle's point of view, and they will have questions galore, but the answers will require some work, and readers will get them, all these answers about the world of the Wardens when Danielle gets them. So fast-moving, but slow to unravel. If that's your jam, pick it up now. Elliot, you're up.
Okay, so you talked about the story. I'll talk about the theme. So the theme is something that, near and dear to Amit and I's heart. It's about failure. It's about how to chew it up, spit it out, and ask for second. Why? Because failure is a universal experience. It's something that marks us. The way we deal with failure kind of, defines who we are as human beings. And to us, especially since it being a 1970s piece, it's also a timeless experience. So you'll get to watch these characters pop themselves up and fall down on their faces real hard. So that is, if that's a story you want to hear, that's what to check out. Also, the artwork. I really can't pop this up enough. Rui's artwork, amazing. The covers keep getting better issue after issue. The color, the letter, everything. Like, the lettering went hog wild on this one.
Yeah.
So please check it out. It's amazing.
Yeah. Absolutely. And for us as well, we highly recommend this book. This is one that I have been thoroughly enjoying. Also as well, I'll put the card here again for a second time. I'll put it at the start. Make sure you go and check out our review if you need to get caught up in the first one. But I highly recommend picking up issue 1 and issue 2 when it drops on the 28th. And for links for Elliot and Amit, we'll put all their social media links and everything down below. So please go and check them out on their socials and keep up to date with everything that they have got going on. Because as I said, we've got Last Wardens coming out now, absolutely amazing, but there's a whole bunch of stuff in the works. But I think that's everything that I kind of had. Did you have any other last questions or anything, Nitro?
No, I think everything was answered just through virtue of conversation. So
yeah, same here. A lot of the questions just kind of came out, which was absolutely awesome.
Yeah.
But thank you so much to Amit and Elliot for joining us today. Thank you for coming and talking about The Last Warden. This has been an absolute blast. I have thoroughly enjoyed this. But everyone,
thank you so much.
Everyone have an amazing day, and everyone remember, it is a good week to be a geek. Take care, and we'll see you all next time. Peace.
Yeah.